immigrants who understand different cultures, people with different attitudes, different backgrounds, different education levels. They come here, they mix with the local population, and they sort of inspire innovation like you've never seen anywhere else. To the credit of the locals, they accept foreigners. So here, it doesn't matter where you're from. If you're smart, you're equal. But if you're not smart, you're an outcast, you're a ghost. I mean, you're going to be discriminated against based on your IQ. And therefore, the stereotypes are people who don't fit the smart stereotype get mistreated over here. So I'm very happy, I'm very positive about Silicon Valley, but also the biggest critic about Silicon Valley. So black people, you'll see very few of them in Silicon Valley, and they get discriminated against because the perception is incorrectly that they're not very smart. Hispanics, okay, Mexicans in particular, perception is that they're gardeners, they're roof repair people, they're not entrepreneurs. So that's the bias that you face over here, is that stereotype. Now, Indians, 25 years ago, Indians used to be considered to be snake charmers, beggars. The image of India was as bad as it could be. But today, I write about immigration, I get death threats from these nativists who worry about people like me taking their jobs away. So now when they see an Indian, they think he's either a scientist, engineer, or he's a CEO, or a doctor. Within 20, 25 years, the perception of Indians changed. In Silicon Valley, if you were an Indian 20 years ago and trying to get funding, no one would return your phone calls. Today, if an Indian and you go to venture capitalists, more likely than not, they'll return your phone call before they return the white guy's phone call. Because the perception is that you must be smart. It changed within a short period of time. How did it change? Because people like me came here as engineers with very good education from top universities in India, and then they started working for American technology companies. Because of their competence, they were able to succeed, and they rose to very senior positions in companies like Intel. You go through the entire old generation of companies, you had an entire crop of Indian entrepreneurs who achieved extraordinary success. And then they started. Then what happened is that they hit the top layers of these companies, and they hit racism again, because there's a glass ceiling. There's a glass ceiling for women. There's a glass ceiling for blacks. There's a glass ceiling for Indians and for foreigners within American corporations. So it's not uniform. It's changing in many companies, but you still have this problem in corporations. So what do? They said, okay, we're going to now start our own corporations. We're going to start our own companies. And they started doing that. So in the late 80s, you started seeing an entire generation of Indians becoming entrepreneurs and achieving success. By the time the dot-com bubble happened, there were literally thousands of Indians who had started companies who started achieving success. And here's what happened, okay? They did something which no other group has done so far. They said, look, back home, we were taught by the British to hate each other. How does a small population rule a big population? That's what happened in India. You divide based on color, you divide based on religion, you divide based on region, you divide based on every aspect there is. So if you go to India, if you went to India a few years ago, 10, 20 years ago, you would have found that Indians really don't help Indians. That was the way Indians were brought up. They came over here and they said, look, here to these white people, we're all Indians. We're all dark-skinned Indians, beggars and snake charmers. Let's help each other. So they started forming their own groups. There was a group called the Indus Entrepreneurs, TIE, which used to be a big deal 10 years ago. So what they started doing was they started consciously helping each other. They started consciously now mentoring other entrepreneurs and funding their startups. And bang, what they did essentially was they learned the secret of Silicon Valley, which is that Silicon Valley is a giant network, and they started achieving extraordinary success. Within a period of 20 years, everything changed for the Indian community. Like I said, now we're hotshots. Now we're CEOs. It wasn't like that too long ago. In the research I've done, we found that from 1995 to 2005, 52% of the startups in Silicon Valley were founded by immigrants. Of that group, 26% were Indians. In other words, about 14% of all the startups in Silicon Valley were founded by Indians. Despite the fact that in that time period, Indians were less than 5% of the population. So you had 5-6%, the numbers have been changing. Let's say roughly 5% of the population starting at roughly 15% of Silicon Valley startups. 3 times overrepresented because of the networks they built. They mastered the rules of engagement of Silicon Valley. So what can you learn from Silicon Valley? You can learn that it's all about networking. It's all about helping each other. Even though culturally, and the reason I'm saying is because back home in Argentina, in Chile, in Peru, the countries you come from, you have the same attitudes, that people don't help each other. It's not the British that did that, it's your own culture that really kept you apart. I remember the first time I went to Santiago. By the way, I advised the Chilean government on Startup Chile. What had happened was that I had gone to Chile at the request of Corfo to look at their IT ecosystem. And I told them it's a disaster waiting to happen. You can't succeed here. It's going to fail. They were shocked that I was so brutal with them. And then the economics minister, Juan Fontaine, and Nico Shea. Nico was an advisor to Juan Fontaine. We got together for dinner at Stanford. And I suggested that let's do an experiment. Let's try to copy Silicon Valley by bringing people over there and setting up the networks between them. And that's how Startup Chile was formed. So when I had dinner with Juan Fontaine, he said, Vivek, I can't do this because I'll get fired. I mean, can you imagine the outcry that happened in Chile if they hear about the fact we're giving money to foreigners to come and start companies here? So I persuaded him to do it. He set aside $1 million. In fact, Nico Shea, I've got to give him credit for that. He persuaded him to do it. Nico stuck his neck out, put his career on the line for Startup Chile. And he persuaded the minister to take it to an experiment, and we did Startup Chile batch number 1, 25 companies. And what started happening was that you started seeing the same magic that you have in Silicon Valley. You had 25 companies come there from all over the world. And this is what happened to Indians over here, that they realized that here we're all foreigners. So in Santiago, they were all foreigners. They started helping each other, mentoring each other. They started forming what are called tribes to start coaching. All of this evolved over the last 2 years. And they started building up a very powerful ecosystem in Santiago, which is now spreading to other regions. So the lesson here is help each other. If you're going to learn one thing from Silicon Valley, learn about helping each other. So when I went to Santiago for the first Startup Chile event over there, I met Horatio, I remember we invited the locals to that as well. And I was asking the locals, this happened with 2 or 3 people, tell me what you do. And the person wouldn't tell me what they did. And then finally he pulled me aside. He says, okay, this is what we do. I said, why the secrecy? He says, because Chileans are crooks. They'll steal my ideas. But this is the difference between what you had in Santiago and what you have in Silicon Valley. Go outside now. You're in Microsoft. Microsoft is a different animal. But go outside to the real Silicon Valley and meet entrepreneurs and ask them what they do. You'll find everyone opens up. You have no idea what they are. They'll start opening, telling you everything about everything they're doing, all the problems they've had, all the failures they've had. They'll start telling you everything about themselves, openly, without any strings attached. You ask them for advice, they'll give you free advice. That's the magic of Silicon Valley. Take it back home. So, the next part of my talk, what's happening with immigration right now? Immigration is a disaster area. That it's almost impossible to get a visa to come and build a company here right now. It's pathetic. I've written a book about it. I've been very vocal. I've testified about it. America is right now bleeding talent. There's a reverse brain drain going on, which means that people who come here to study, people who come here to stay for a few months, start their companies, they end up getting harassed by the immigration department or getting kicked out, or they just can't get jobs over here and they're leaving. This is happening in droves. Hundreds of thousands of people are returning home to other parts of the world. So Silicon Valley is bleeding because of fucked up US immigration policies. Now don't quote me on that. But that's the disaster over here, which means that if you wanted to be here and build a startup here, forget it. It's a waste of your time. It's not worth doing it because the paperwork required, the effort required, you're going to lose a year to 2. Even if you were qualified for the O1 visa, it's not worthwhile. But the good news is that it doesn't matter anymore. There was a time when this was the only place to be. As recently as 5 or 7 years ago, this would be where you have to be if you want to achieve success. Now the tide has turned. What's happened is that there are now more opportunities for you back home in Latin America than there are in America. I'll tell you what's going to happen over the next 2 or 3 years. The cost of devices like this is dropping exponentially. I'm involved with a project which we started in Palo Alto, in which we brought cheap tablets from India to Palo Alto High School, the most elite school in Silicon Valley, and probably in America, if you look at it from a technology point of view. This is where the children of the venture capitalists, children of CEOs go. We gave them cheap tablets from India, $40 tablets from India, to see what happens when they use them. They took it home, they started playing with them, and then they came back and wrote reports on it. And the comments were, this is good, I like it, but on this screen it's too slow. When I play this game, then on this thing, you see, look over there, it's choppy over there. And then another child said, look, when I go home, it's on my home Wi-Fi network, it's too slow, I don't like using it. But you've got to realize, these are the cheapest tablets in the world being given to iPad users, iPhone users, the most advanced technology users of their age in the world. So that was a surprise to all of us, because what it said was that these tablets are ready for prime time. So we did another experiment. We took it to Durham, North Carolina. 100 African-American children from welfare homes. In fact, they were all African-American over there. Done by a foundation over there that's trying to teach them science, technology, engineering, and mathematics skills. We loaded the tablets up with STEM apps, science, technology apps. And it was a summer camp. And the kids started using it, and the knowledge level of many of the children started rising. They started taking the tablets on vacations, and they essentially became big fans of tablets, and now suddenly they had access to the same technology that the rich kids had. These are kids whose parents are on welfare, therefore they can't afford $600 iPads. We gave them 7-inch Android tablets in India, and they loved them. The parents wanted to buy them, they could afford $40. Right? Now what we're doing is we're going to be doing 2 hackathons here in Silicon Valley over the next 2 months. We're going to bring in several hundred children from the poor. Silicon Valley isn't all rich, by the way. If you go to East Palo Alto, you could be back in a rundown part of Latin America. That's how bad it is. It's disgusting to see poverty in Silicon Valley. You go to San Jose and you have poor kids over there. You go to Oakland, it's drug-infested poverty, and children are left out. So we're going to take several hundred of those children now and give them these tablets and have hackathons in which they're going to learn how to write apps. But the message over here is that the technology is coming from the developing world to Silicon Valley, and the next step is these tablets will likely be manufactured in the United States. $50 tablets. And I'm pushing all this because I'm trying to force the price to drop. But look at what Apple just announced. More $600 devices. Even the cheap iPhone requires a plan that's about $500. This is ridiculous. Apple, Samsung, none of the big players will reduce prices because there's no motivation for them to do that. So what I'm trying to do is to bring technology from the developing world here. And if it succeeds here, it'll succeed anywhere. Force the price of tablets to drop down to $50, and then watch what happens. So within a year from now, I have no doubt that you'll be buying $50 tablets. What happens in Latin America when you have $50 tablets? Suddenly, the poor can afford tablets all across the country. It's already happening in China. It's already beginning to happen in India. So right now, in places like Mexico, you have a monopoly for internet access. Those monopolies will drop because you'll have experiments like Google, what they're doing with Google Loon, and Google Fiber will start having alternative internet services being provided to the poor. Within 2 to 3 years, you will have the poorest of the poor all across Latin America and Asia now having tablets. Just imagine what happens now. It's a limited market, mostly rich, elite people. Now suddenly you have the poorest of the poor getting access to the same knowledge that you have here, the same knowledge that we have here, the same knowledge that scientists have. Now you're able to sell them goods on Amazon-like companies, Latin America. Apps, they're able to build their own apps. Ride sharing, bus sharing. You can just think of thousands of new applications that become possible in Latin America. So you're going to see an internet boom which makes the dot-com boom of the 90s seem lame. And that's because it's going to happen in a very short period of time all across the world. Imagine the things you can do with it. So not only is it apps you can build, but also sensor types of devices. Like my phone's case is an EKG monitor. This does the same thing as a very expensive medical device does. It's $8 worth of componentry to build a heart monitor. You can now start building agriculture monitors using cheap sensors. cost of sensors has dropped about 1,000-fold over the last 10 or 20 years. Which means that now you can start connecting sensors to your phones and coming up with all sorts of new medical devices, come up with new agriculture devices. You can start thinking about all the applications for that. Also robotics. It used to be that robots, when we were young, we expected robots to be serving us and doing all these amazing things. It never happened. Because the computing power required to do sophisticated voice recognition, to do vision analysis, to start recognizing objects, and to manipulate complex objects was too great. This iPhone has more computing power than existed on the entire planet the day I was born. This is a supercomputer sitting in my pocket. And the iPhone 5S is going to be, 400 times faster than this, or better than this, some ridiculous number. 64-bit architecture sitting in your pocket. Imagine, the Indian tablets I talked about, the ones we're talking about manufactured in the United States with a 1.2 dual-core processor in the $50, $60 price range. Imagine going 3 years forward and having a 64-bit processor for $50. Now imagine being able to connect sensors to it. Imagine being able to build robots using it. Imagine being able to now create the next generation of medical devices, transforming your entire cities with it. Look at drones. You can buy a really sophisticated drone for about $300 or $400 right now. Go on Amazon, look for the Parrot AR drone. That'll go for a few miles with a high-definition camera. It's controlled by your iPad. Now, Mexico City, I know, is a nightmare for traffic, and so are many other parts of South America. What if you started doing delivery of pizzas via drones? Delivery of office documents via drone? Started setting up drone-to-drone networks. You could make the entire FedEx or delivery system obsolete. You could replace the post office. You could start going out to villages now and changing their lives. What will this cost? Practically nothing. All these things I talked about. The most expensive component is your iPhone. If you get the Indian tablet, you're down to $50. If you get the sensors, another $50. You don't need venture funding. You don't need angel capital. You have enough money in your savings. If you can afford to come here, you can afford to buy all the tools necessary to build world-changing technologies. That's what's possible right now. Why do you have to be in Silicon Valley where they're doing brain-dead social media apps? Look at the TechCrunch disrupt garbage. Most of those companies are Mickey Mouse, idiotic companies, which don't make sense. So what you should do is, while you're here, start connecting to Silicon Valley. Form the networks, because those are invaluable. Understand the value system, understand the culture of Silicon Valley. Make friends over here. Get all the ideas you can. Learn about these technologies in Silicon Valley. And then go back home and solve the problems back home. You can build the next billion-dollar businesses there and then bring them to the United States. For example, I talked about the drone example. In all of Latin America, as far as I know, I could be wrong on this, but to my knowledge, there are no rules or regulations governing drone flight. You can use drones for anything you want to. They're like kites that you fly. Right? They're for hobbyists. In the United States, you can fly drones as a hobby, but you can't use them for commercial purposes. In other words, you can't deliver pizza for them and charge for the pizza. You can move the pizza around, but you can't do commerce based on it. In Latin America, there's no restriction. So what if you set up Latin American delivery service and got it working in different regions of Latin America? You build all the infrastructure necessary for it. And 3 years from now, when the USA revises its regulations and the FAA allows it, you now come and conquer the US market with your technology. That's the sort of thing you have to do. And this iPhone case that I have, it took about a year and a half for them to get FDA approval. For what? An iPhone case. Why? Because it's a medical device. In Latin America, you don't have the FDA telling you what to do. So what if you started developing all of these new technologies, starting developing health technologies, started looking at data from the human genome, combining it with your sensors, setting up all of these monitoring systems, coming up with new automated physicians in Latin America, and again, get them perfected in Latin America, and then you come and conquer the US market. Because when you're ready, your technology is being used by 5 million people over there, it'll be very hard for the FDA to turn you down. Again, you can develop it back home. There's nothing stopping you. The same technologies that we have access to here in Silicon Valley, you have access to back home. The only thing you don't have is a culture of sharing, of risk-taking, of thinking big. You're thinking too small. You can import that from Silicon Valley. You can just come and hang out over here, listen to some of my talks, and then go back and build your world-changing companies. That's all I want to say.